in the last decade, there's been an 84% increase in alcohol use disorders amongst women. And you compare that to a 35% increase for men.
Welcome, everybody. It's Katie with Ria Health, and I'm here today with Claudia Christian, Ria Health advisor and founder at the C3 Foundation. First of all, Claudia, as always, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me.
It's always my pleasure, Katie.
Absolutely. I love talking to you and picking your brain about this stuff. Um, I'm particularly excited today about this topic because I think it's something that perhaps isn't on everybody's radar. And I know it affects both you and me and about 50% of the US population, and that is women with alcohol use disorder. So I know, of course, you and I have our own experience with this, but there's also been a lot more research and studies and information being published on this topic and how alcohol and alcohol use disorder is affecting the female population. So I just want to dive right into this with you and hear more from you about what you've seen in the research and information about how alcohol use disorder is really impacting women today.
Well, I think the most staggering statistic that I've run into recently is in the last decade, there's been an 84% increase in alcohol use disorders amongst women. And you compare that to a 35% increase for men. So this is heavily skewed, and it's really staggering. There's been a lot of research in the UK on Generation Z. These are women that were born in the 70s that are in their 30s that are developing alcohol use disorders much sooner than normally has been skewed in the past. For I think the first time in history, really, we're finding that women outnumber men with alcohol use disorders. So it's a really frightening time, especially if you understand what is the difference between men and women drinking, and this is something that we really need to understand in order to treat it. Just in a nutshell, women drink more because of negative attributes. In other words, because of stress and trauma. This starts in adolescence or even sooner than that and transcends all the way through adulthood. Men usually drink because of positive reinforcements of alcohol. So in other words, when they socialize with their buddies, or they usually relapse, in fact, in social occasions. That's when men usually relapse. Women usually relapse when they suffer from an emotional issue or trauma. So you've got one group of individuals drinking because they're basically self-medicating in layman's terms, and another group of people relapsing and drinking because they find fun in alcohol. These are two wildly different reasons to drink. So if women are drinking to self-medicate, then we need to switch the treatment plan for women. And this is a very, this is something that normally it's a one size fits all treatment plan
Absolutely,
for
yeah.
individuals. So there's so much going on here, everything from emotional to trauma to post-traumatic stress disorder, and the different ways that men and women handle and deal with them. And also you throw in the component of hormones, and we have a whole issue that is separate: women and alcohol use disorder.
Can we talk more about the hormones piece? Is there more you can share for us on that, on how women's hormones impact their drinking?
Yes, and this is something that has been so fascinating to me for the past decade because, and this is my personal experience with this, and it's so interesting to sort of see it justified now in research. When I first started, this is before I found naltrexone used in a targeted manner to deal with my own alcohol misuse. So when I went from being a normal drinker to a heavy drinker to being abstinent, and then I became a binge drinker. When I became a binge drinker, I was a very fastidious tracker of my relapses, thankfully, in a way, because this is kind of my own little research, very informal research. I kept date books, those old school date books, and I have date books for every year when I was struggling as a binge drinker. Every single time I relapsed, I was PMSing.
What?
Every single time. This is not a one-off. This is not 80%. 100% of the time that I relapsed, I was premenstrual. So so I have these stacks of these books saying, you know, binge, relapse, whatever, and it's always right before I started my period. So when I finally found naltrexone, I started talking to the doctors I was dealing with, specifically Dr. Roy Escapa, Dr. Stephen Cox, and I said, you guys, come on, there's got to be a correlation between hormones and women's drinking? And of course, they said, well, there's no studies as far as we know. So now years later, here I am researching the ovarian hormone correlation between women's drinking and women's bodies, and I'm floored, because that's exactly what I found. And of course, in the past decade, dealing with women through coaching and so forth, I found that women who are still menstruating also display the same tendencies to binge drink prior to their menstrual cycles. So this is not a coincidence. This is something that really needs to be researched, and then bring menopause into the situation. And we're really talking about hormonal imbalances and drinking amongst women. So you see women in their 20s and 30s, and you see women then perimenopausal and menopausal that are drinking to self-medicate from hormonal fluctuations and imbalances. I unfortunately do not have a medical degree, so nor am I a researcher, but boy, if I was in that field, this is what I would focus on. This is exactly what I would focus on, because there's too much informal data, rolling around to not recognize that this is a pattern amongst women.
Absolutely. And that research just kind of affirms the need for the kind of unique treatments for the different sexes so that their needs are being met as they need to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, women are twice as likely to suffer from depression and anxiety than men. Twice as likely.
Twice.
So right now you have this, and now, as we've just discussed earlier, women are using alcohol to counteract negative effects. Stress and anxiety are negative effects.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're using this substance to try and fix those issues, and of course, as we've discussed before, Katie, alcohol creates more anxiety once the cortisol starts kicking in and your sleep is affected. So it's this vicious circle of, oh, I feel anxious, I'm going to drink, and now the alcohol is making me actually more anxious. Yes. Not to mention the hangovers and the lost focus at work and the personal relationships that suffer. So we're really, there's a pressing need to deal with this therapeutically, on a biological, on a psychosocial aspect of it. So the treatment plans, I believe, have to be more informed and more well-rounded for women.
And so have you seen in, your research and what you've experienced, what are the different health consequences for women who misuse alcohol, and why are they different from men?
Well, that's another staggering thing, because we're seeing so many incidents of early alcohol use disorders in young women. And of course, everyone knows that women have more fat and less water. They also make much less of the enzyme dehydrogenase, which is the actual enzyme that breaks down alcohol before it gets to the bloodstream. So all of these factors taken into consideration, you then get the result of women having more incidence of throat cancer, esophagus cancer, liver issues, huge liver issues, cancers. All of these incidents, heart issues, are more profound in women because their bodies simply don't assimilate. They don't break down alcohol as well as men.
So it's literally like riskier to their health for women.
It is far riskier to women's health. And we're seeing more and more incidents of women hospitalizations in their 50s and 60s, and older women that prior to this, women usually started decreasing drinking in their elderly years. And this is not happening now. Women are increasing once again. It's also happening in across every cultural, I mean, people always say, oh, it's an issue of the not educated or social economic classes, but this is so not true. Actually, the more educated and the wealthier you are, the more apt you are to drink. And this is another frightening thing. In the US alone, 800 million gallons of wine are consumed every year, and women consume the majority of that.
Wow. That's unbelievable. I can't even fathom that. 800 million gallons.
Of
Wow.
wine sold in the USA, and women are drinking the lion's share of that 800 million gallons. And if you can't, I mean, let's just be honest here. The majority of marketing of wine is geared towards women.
Yeah.
The wine companies are really gearing it towards women. So there's the, mommy juice and the wine o'clock and all that sort of marketing that is specifically towards women. And it's resulting in, as I said earlier, these women as young as 30 developing liver issues, cirrhosis, cancers, not to mention breast cancer, which you have much higher risk of developing breast cancer if you're drinking to excess or drinking. Actually, some studies are saying that even 1 or 2 glasses a day is completely detrimental to your health. So,
Wow.
I mean, well, when you think about it, ethanol is toxic, no matter how you break it down. And if women don't have enough of the enzyme to break it down, and they have more fat in their body and they have less water in their body, then clearly the health implications are dire.
Yeah. And I know in today's world, we're kind of already up against a lot more toxins and things that can be harmful to us. So this is just another thing to put fuel on the fire, I guess.
Absolutely. And it's also something to think about when treating women. I mean, AA does work for men and women, but from a lot of women, what I've heard, what the feedback is in 12-step programs is that they're not really addressing, it's a place to talk, but the emotional stress and anxiety aspects of AA. For men, it's great because they're meeting like-minded people, sober people to hang out with. And men drink socially and for positive reinforcement. So if they find all new friends that don't drink, I'm not simplifying their issues, by the way. I'm not saying that all men are just party guys that want to have football buddies. I'm just saying that it's a different subset that has helped with that type of peer support. So now they've found that to be helpful to them. Whereas women are still, maybe they find sober friends, but they still haven't dealt with their triggers. If the trigger is stress and anxiety, they haven't dealt with that. And talking about it is not really going to be maybe the end all be all. So, once again, if we can think of a pharmacological approach to the issue, if we can also think of a psychosocial approach, a therapeutic approach to the issue, and formulate methods to treat women that are different than treating men. Now that we know the physiological differences and the way that women can consume and break down alcohol, and we also know the emotional implications of how women take post-adolescent and adolescent and childhood stress and self-medicate with alcohol throughout that into adulthood and then develop an alcohol use disorder. We really have to deal with all of that as a whole. We can't just throw one thing at a woman and expect it to be fixed. So I think that this hopefully will lead to a more dynamic, more personal, specific treatment plan for women out there of every age. We're talking about also, maybe you have an 18-year-old who's been drinking since she was 12.
Yeah.
She's going to have a whole different set of issues than the woman who's 40 and who's miscarried 4 times.
Yeah.
And then the 70-year-old who's retired and whose husband just passed.
Yeah.
I mean, every single woman that we deal with is individual and has individual needs and cares and concerns, and they all have a different family dynamic. So maybe you don't have the support system that you really need. Maybe you don't have the understanding spouse, or maybe your children never want to see you drink again. So here, how are you going to do targeted use of naltrexone if that's the case? Or maybe, maybe you should try and use a medication for long-term sobriety or maintenance of abstinence. So every plan has to be really unique. And I think that that's what's so exciting now about telemedicine companies and about doctors who are finally understanding the dynamics of individual alcohol misuse, and especially specifically between the two sexes.
Yeah, I wish this is information I would have seen when I was struggling, because I feel like, and especially a lot of women that join Ria Health's program, I hear often that they've tried AA and just didn't feel right. Like, they're supportive of it for those who it works for, but it just didn't work for them. And so I think just having this knowledge can be really helpful to know, no, you're not a failure if this, one program didn't work for you. There are really other options. And really it's the treatments, responsibility to tailor it to you, to make it unique to you and your needs to get you through it, and not just force a one size fits all treatment plan on you.
Absolutely. And in regards, I mean, when I attended AA, I think the last thing I needed to be told was that I was powerless.
Yeah.
Because as an actress for my entire life, with having, feeling incredibly powerless throughout my career, I didn't need to feel powerless in my recovery. And
Yeah.
I didn't like being, constantly reminded that I have a disease or an allergy. I think that this is the beautiful thing about science-based recovery, in my opinion, and I'm not negating the help that other programs give to other people. Just for me personally, I wanted to feel powerful in my recovery. I wanted to be able to make choices, and I knew that it was going to be a process. And now looking back, I didn't realize it was going to be this long of a process. But the most important factor for me was to be able to look back someday, which I am now comfortable looking back and saying, I used to have a problem with alcohol. And that was my end all be all, was that I wanted to be in a position to say, I used to have an alcohol issue. I don't anymore. It doesn't affect my mind. It's not something I think about. It's not something I use anymore. It's not it doesn't bother me to be around it at all. My boyfriend drinks, I mean, I don't care. It's just something that it's just a non-entity in my life at this point. And that's something that I don't think I would have ever been able to achieve without medication, and without everything that I've learned just by advocacy and being around researchers and doctors, and understanding the neurological aspect of addiction. And it's been quite the journey. But you're right. I think there has to be very specific support for women, and I certainly, and I'm sure you, Katie, also have been seeing that. I don't know about it. Well, I can say that the majority of the people who reach out to me are women.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's just because women are more apt to seek help. I think it's because the number of women with AUD is growing substantially.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Claudia. This has been extremely informative and just really helpful to be able to talk to you. And I guess here's to feeling empowered in recovery for women and men, but especially for women as well.
Yes, absolutely. And the most important thing to know is that you have choices. There are options out there, so it can be tailor fit to whatever your needs are, whatever your environmental aspect is at home. We can find a program that is suitable for you and that will work for you. So that's the exciting thing about treatment nowadays, is that there are so many options, and that makes me really hopeful for those women out there suffering right now.
Yeah, same here. And a big thanks to you for a lot of the groundwork you've been doing to spread the word about evidence-based treatments and kind of raising awareness to telemedicine options, and just all of the work you've done with your nonprofit. It's really made an impact.
It's my joy. I just want everybody to get the help that they need, so they don't waste the years of their life like I did.
Yeah.
I want women to enjoy their 40s.
And I love that you can laugh about it now.
Well, what am I going to do? Cry all day?
Yeah.
No, it brings me joy to know that a lot of people won't have to suffer needlessly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Claudia. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you, Katie. Have a great day.